Scott, and appreciate everybody for taking the time to join on today. And hopefully I can present something that is of value to at least one person today. That's always my goal. If I can just get one person's interest, I've succeeded today. So, Scott, did that come through okay?
Yep. We're seeing your screen.
Great. So, apologize, I'm not in a fancy office. I'm actually in my truck right now. Within my role at Understanding Ag, we travel around, but we also have our own operations that we manage as well. So, as I said, I work for Understanding Ag. We're essentially a global consulting company now working in the regenerative ag space. We're on over 36 million acres actively consulting now, anywhere from Mexico, Canada, all across the United States. We've had a presence in England, and I've also been to Ireland as well, doing some work over there. So, you mentioned, Scott, earlier about how some of the things I'm doing right now might be applicable even up in your neck of the woods. The things we're going to be talking about that I'll be touching on are applicable anywhere where there's soil. We can regenerate and improve our livelihood and our profitability if we understand the context of the environment we're working in. So, regenerative ag is the buzzword right now. Everybody's talking about it. And to me, it is our last line or our last attempt to really turn things around in agriculture. We all have a presence in agriculture. We all we drive the agricultural sector because we all consume things. We all drink water. So that is all part of the agricultural system. And we have to understand that if we want change, we can easily make change within the agricultural world by buying what our food dollar goes towards. And I firmly believe that. And, as I grew up a very conventional minded person, I thought farmers feed the world. You got to bow down and kiss our feet for all the hard work and time and everything we put in. And, as I'll just kind of jump through some introduction of myself is my family had a pretty large operation back in the 80s. After my grandpa died, the 80s were tough. My dad and my uncles liked to party harder more than they liked to work on the farm. Lost it all. So essentially, I'm a first generation farmer again. So I've had to build everything that we're working with right now from the ground up. But also in that time, I went to work in ag retail after college, worked myself up. I hate to be given an opportunity, or I hate to be given a position. I always want to earn my position. I don't like to wake up on third base thinking I hit a triple. I actually want to hit a triple. So my belief was I want to become a crop scout, work up my ranks through applicator, sales associate, and become a salesman. And that's exactly what I did, and fairly successful at that. But as we had our first child in 2018, really kind of got a hold of what am I doing? Listen to these farmers talk about how they're raising high yields but not making money. If it wasn't for crop insurance, they weren't making money. You're working when the first guy starts and you're done when the last guy's done, consuming a lot of time. And I got to thinking, what is the dollar worth? What are we even doing here? The farmer's not making money. The company's making money. The retailers are making money. The manufacturers are making money. But that's not, to me, what agriculture is. I want the producer to be in charge of making some money. And unfortunately, most producers, even today, they're just simply a money conduit. And that's the way I view things, right or wrong. And I'm sorry if I offend anybody, but I from what I've seen in just my short time of on this earth, I'm tired of seeing producers getting taken advantage of. And I want to give them the responsibility to take control of their operation and find some profit, but also explore that and improve environmental quality that we're working with here. I always ask the questions when I do these presentations in agriculture, and I'll ask the group here if anybody wants to unmute themselves and answer. What is in agriculture? What's our number one export? Is it corn, beef, soybeans? Does somebody have an answer? I would assume somebody's going to know it. There's no wrong answers.
Soybeans or wheat?
Nope. One more option. Somebody throw out one more guess. I seen there's an NRCS person on here. They ought to know the answer.
I'm going to say water.
Topsoil. Topsoil is our number one export in agriculture. Between 2 and 5 tons per acre. I don't care how high your corn yields are or anything like that. It does not equate to the amount of pounds we're losing in topsoil per acre every year. To me, this has to stop. We can't sustain or move forward as a civilization. No civilization has ever outlasted their loss of their topsoil. So we're at a point in time where I feel we have to make a change. Sustainable ag was not it. We can't sustain a degraded resource. Why would we want to sustain that? It's kind of like the old saying goes, if I came home and my wife asked me, how's our marriage? And I said, sustainable, I'd get hit. But when I come home and she asks me, how our marriage is. And I said, honey, it's regenerative. That's probably why we got 4 kids. So we want to get better. We want to continue to improve things. We have to improve things because the next generation is reliant on it. And we can't look at just the here and now, but we have to look at the next 1,000 years, in my opinion. So I'm very passionate about what my role in agriculture is. I firmly believe that we can make a difference and that we can change things to where they're going to be positive. But we just really have to have a gut check and really understand that we're working with a lot of free things in nature, but are we able to take advantage of them? So I titled this presentation, Finding a Context Against the Grain. And the reason I go about this is here's just a quick picture of my family. As I said, young family, the oldest is 7, and anything down to just soon to be a year old. So very busy operation. But when we talk about in regenerative ag is, in our stance with understanding ag is, how do we drive the 6 principles of soil health and 3 rules of adaptive stewardship to really improve those 4 ecosystem processes? Folks, those 4 ecosystem processes are happening over every acre every year. It's the water cycle, energy cycle, nutrient cycle, and community dynamics. And by that, I mean diversity. So what are we doing to improve our nutrient cycling? How are we improving our water cycling? What are we doing to improve diversity? And what are we doing to capture that solar energy that's coming up every day? Every time that sun comes up, are we utilizing that opportunity to drive photosynthesis to feed the soil biology that we understand is underneath our feet? Throughout college, it was all physical and chemical. You know, we very rarely talked about the biological standpoint, but to me, the biology drives the physical and the chemical structures of soil and how they actually function and work. And as I stand around here, I ask people, you know, here in West Central Illinois, we got some productive soil, but right on the Illinois, bluff of the Illinois River. You know, as I stand around here, we talk about, I was actually talking with a state representative one time, and she was laughing, said, somebody from Chicago said we live in a food desert. And I said, well, ma'am, do we? And she goes, well, heck no, we got all this corn and soybeans out here. Look at all this food we're growing. I said, stand around, turn around 360 degrees. Of all the acres out here that are growing, what percentage of this stuff is actually going to go to your plate or is going to hit a plate nearby? And the honest answer is very little of that is going to actually be consumed. We're raising faux food, in my opinion. There's so much more potential of actual consumable food that we can be raising on this land that we're missing the boat on. And there's a market opportunity there, in my opinion. But I think if we're setting our ways and setting convenience, we're missing a huge part of what could be actually reviving and fueling and feeding our communities. And that's what's really passionate for me as I look around, you know, these large agriculture communities. The towns are dead. There's nothing there. We've lost everything. You know, the grocery stores and food joints are now your dollar stores and Casey's. And that's, to me, that's not the way it should be. But anyway, you know, as in agriculture, we focus on, especially in row crop world, we focus on nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, right? And I'm not going to ask this question for an answer, but what percentage of this crop that we're raising is actually consumed or component of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium? 95% of what we're raising out here is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, the three free elements that we have over every acre every year. But yet we focus, and we are so terrible with our management of the 3 to 5% that's actually in that plant. So how impactful is that 3 to 5% on our local communities, our water sources? Folks, it frustrates me, even as a producer, knowing that our taxpayers are having to bail us out all the time. And I'll get into some more information on that as we go down here. But I take really my management on my acres that I'm taking care of, I take personally, and I want to make sure anybody else downstream is going to benefit from our management. The context. So of the 6 principles, the biggest one that we talk about is context. You know, and each of these are different. You know, you got the other 5 soil health principles, you know, living root, diversity, armor, minimizing disruption, and livestock integration. But overall, the context is what drives how you implement the other 5. You know, as a financial, what's the family's status? And that's huge within younger producers trying to implement regenerative ag practices, dealing with the family dynamics. What's your spiritual context? I firmly believe that we are just as much created this earth as the good Lord. We're just as much a soil as we are anything. So I believe that the good Lord created us to work in synchrony and harmony with what we're living on here. You know, the time constraints, what's your environment, everything. There's so many things that drive the context, but each of us, even a neighbor side by side, is going to have a completely different context and how they're managing and going down the regenerative ag process. So I like to start with this. You know, how are you going to go down this? And, you know, a lot of times when we have soil health academies, a lot of people are very motivated. They want to go home and try everything. But I tell them, say, folks, listen, every dead body on Mount Everest was once a highly motivated person. So maybe we just need to slow it down a little bit. But also, you can't go home and not do anything. You know, as Wayne Gretzky says, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So in my opinion, in agriculture and where I stand is we have to find a balance somewhere between these very aggressive approaches, but also not sitting on our butt for too long and not doing anything, because time is of the essence, in my opinion. We need to start turning things around. So keep this in your mind. And then we hear a lot of times, Gabe Brown is one of my bosses, right? So if I did everything like Gabe did, I would fail myself. And I would say, you're right, you should fail, because your farm is different, completely different than Gabe's. And then we hear things like, well, the salesman said I'd see a 10 bushel increase, but it didn't. Well, does the salesman know exactly what you should have been applying there? And we're looking at a product only there. I'm not anti-product, but as I've been in agri-retail, as I've looked at some of the reports and studies from even the University of Illinois about the efficiencies of the fertilizers and products that we're applying, folks, 30 to 50% of what we're applying is actually utilized. The rest of it's either microbially mediated, which just means it's tied in the gut of the biology, or we're losing it. It's pollution essentially. We talk about the fall anhydrous around here. I don't say, we're losing, we have nitrate loss from fall applied anhydrous. I say we're polluting, with that. And that's simply what it is. We have to be cognizant of the managements we're making out there. So I want to drive through here and talk about, in my context, how I'm getting started, things that I'm doing here, and walk you through just a transition of what I was able to do, and walk you through essentially a scenario that I'm looking at here, because a lot of people don't know how to start or even where to get to. So fall of 23, this is just a quick example here. I had some home raised VNS rye seeded 25 pounds, some 2-year-old hairy vetch at 4 pounds, and 2-year-old Balanza clover seeded at 1 pound. Early in March, I came in. We had a hog confinement near us. I'm very critical on my disturbances of the soil. They're never knifing. They're not dragging the big tanks across the ground. But I noticed they had this drag line sprinkler system. I said, would you guys be interested in applying some of this? And they said yes. They're always looking for ways to get rid of manure. So this is essentially free for me. I just get to give them access to the ground. But I told them, I said, you cannot apply more than 10,000, or I want 5,000 gallons. They like to apply an acre inch, which is 27,000 gallons. So we compromised and we settled with 10,000 gallons. But I've got a green growing plan out there, and that's the thing that I strive for the most. Is I think I can be okay and sequester and hold on to those nutrients, because this is a catch and release system that I'm using here with these cover crops. So we went on with about 10,000 gallons, which is less than half an inch equivalent per acre. And any folks that have seen anything to do with manure applications, an acre inch equivalent of hog manure almost makes the ground float. It's so sloppy, if you will. I'm always interested in knowing what the cover crop has in it. So as you can see, this cover crop started to take up some of the nutrients. So I take a biomass sample and ship those off to kind of know how much nutrients those cover crops are sequestering. So if you see here, how palish green that cover crop is moving now, it tells me that cover crop is starting to capture some of those nutrients, and the biomass is really starting to explode here. So with those cover crop biomass samples, I pulled this sample April 23rd. And you can see the seed-in ratio are things that I really pay attention to, and I'm happy to follow up with people on that. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of all this, because it took me a while to get all this understood as well. But the biggest thing I want you to understand is look at the nutrients, the pounds per acre of nutrient equivalent there. 100 pounds of nitrogen, 35 pounds of phosphorus, 126 pounds of P2O5 or K2O, so that's like 126 pounds of potash. The seed-in ratio is a 10-to-1, which is very low, which means think of it like this. It's going to degrade and disintegrate faster. But if it was like, think wheat straw, and we will lay that out there, that's got a very high seed-in ratio of like 70 to 90-to-1. So it's going to stay there longer. So this is, if I killed it right now, it would melt away very fast, flush all those nutrients out very fast. And if I didn't have enough crop growth there, I pretty much wasted those nutrients, in my opinion. But the tons of dry matter as well, we're sitting at about a 1.2 tons. The next week, we're starting to increase tons again, 1.6. The seed-in ratio is starting to creep up. As that crop gets a little more mature, it starts to increase that seed-in ratio. You can see the nutrients are still about the same, nothing extreme there. 5.3, as we jump forward here, look at the tons now, 2.84. Our seed-in ratio is starting to come in check. Our nitrogen has now doubled. So that tells me we're really starting to capture onto that hog manure that was applied. The potassium almost doubled, the phosphorus increased. So we're really starting to see these numbers jump up. Sulfur, zinc, iron, all these things, which are critical for crop growth. 5.10, 3.8, our seed-in ratio is 14.2. Still up there around 200 with the nitrogen. Numbers are kind of holding steady here, right? So that's what we're really looking forward to. Now 5.17, and I still haven't planted corn into this, mind you. This was last year. So we were kind of a wet spring, if you remember last spring at all. 4.6 tons of dry matter, 15.2 tons, or 15.2 on the ratio, almost 300 pounds of nitrogen, folks, 400 pounds of potassium. 81 units of phosphorus. The cover crops are doing the job for me, right? 13 pounds of sulfur. This was the time at the last sample I sent off. I had to fly to England to do a couple workshops, as smart as I was at forward planning. But I thought, you know what, it's going to work out. So as we get back home, I flew home the following Saturday from London Heathrow. I got up at 6 o'clock, and 6 in the evening, I was planting corn in central Illinois because I know the time was against me. But you can see how this rye is starting to get mature. I was very nervous about the seed-in ratio being too high for corn, but it worked out just right. As you can see, it's a very high biomass. But there's always fun parts about planting in a mature rye with an open station tractor, right? As a poor young farmer trying to start out, but this is something I just got to deal with, right? It's just the joys and discomforts of farming here. But as you can see, after I got that crop planted, I was able to come in here and roller crimp this down. You can actually see right here where I dribble on some nitrogen with my planter. It kind of kills that cover crop out. I was trying to be too much of a purist in this management. I wanted to do things as natural as possible and reduce my herbicides as much as possible. So I thought, as mature as this cover crop was, I'm easily going to get killed. The bad thing is the timing of this. So I flew to England, flew back home, and my wife was going in that next Monday to be induced to have child number 4. So as you can imagine, 30-year-old guy running around like a psychopath trying to get everything done in a few days is pretty comical, to say the least. So long story short, this cover crop crimper that I've got here, I did not put water in it. I should have. I don't have active downforce on my drawbar arms on the tractor, so I can't really press down on it good enough. There was so much biomass there that I maybe killed 20% of it because it was just lighting that roller crimper just kind of right on top of it. So not a failure, a learning opportunity, I say. So I did come in with Steadfast Q, which is for non-GMO corn, but I wanted to see what this corn emerged with first to see what kind of stand I got. So I still got by with a 1-pass herbicide, but it could have been a lot cheaper if I would have terminated this right now with like some Gramoxone or Roundup or something like that at a light rate. Even would have terminated that, and I would have been okay. I could have saved another probably $15 to $20 an acre with that. So as the growing season progresses here, you can see the residue now. It's deadened off. The corn, I was a little nervous about the corn. Corn does not like to see green competition when it's emerging, but overall, I was very happy with the stands. Was it perfect? No. There's some things I could have improved upon, but overall, I was happy with this. When you're talking a planter that's 30 years older than myself, you use what you got and make it work. So there's no excuses, in my opinion. Now you can see this residue is really holding this moisture in place. We talked about the nutrient cycle and water cycle. So these nutrients are now flushing out, feeding this corn crop. The wonderful thing about this is as I pulled away from anhydrous ammonia, you can see these brace roots here. A lot of people say you don't want brace roots, but the wonderful thing that I've been able to find after about 5 years of integrating diverse crop rotations, meaning wheat, diverse cover crops in between that, corn and soy, I'm able to develop this corn no matter what hybrid I plant here, as long as it's a non-GMO. This corn can fix its own nitrogen. There's a product called mucilage, and it's like a gooey snot that forms on these brace roots here. So I'm able to atmospherically fix nitrogen from the air, because as most farmers don't realize, we've got over 37,000 tons of nitrogen over every acre over every year because of just based on atmospheric percentages, right? So why not utilize this corn and its ability to pull this nitrogen to fix its own nitrogen when we've got these high-tech corn breeders right now developing this hybrid now that you're going to have to pay big bucks for that can fix its own nitrogen. So I can save people a lot of time and money and effort just by getting some diverse crop rotations and watching what fertility we are putting out there to allow this process to happen. That biology is in the soil, but are we allowing it to proliferate and do its job? As you can see, the moisture, we're retaining a lot of moisture here. This residue is doing its job. There's no weeds. What are weeds anyway? But you can see these white filaments. We've got saprophytic fungi breaking down this residue. To me, this is a perfect scenario. Even though I had some hiccups, it's still better than the alternative, right? And this is what we call sugar soil. So this ground is typically white and yellow looking throughout the year. But look how much dark color this ground has to it. I've completely changed what this ground now looks like. This is, pollination time frame. This outside row is obviously planted out here along the edge too far, but look at the overall color. 70 pounds of nitrogen, that was purchased and applied on that along with the hog manure. So did I even need to apply any nitrogen? Probably not. I could have saved some money there as well, but very happy with this timber soil and what this crop can produce. Things are going really well, and you think, man, I've just done things. This regenerative thing is so easy. Why isn't anybody doing it? Gosh, it just looks so good. And here's what the stuff looked like here just this past spring before I did any work. You can see how that residue is still there, right? And this is still helping me hold back my weed pressure right now, even in the soybeans as they're coming up right now. As I said, you can do everything right, but as you step back and look, what happened here, where I farm, it's essentially a lot of dead end roads, a major creek bottom called Sugar Creek, which outfitters come from all over the world to hunt deer on. I've essentially raised a perfect food plot for the hunters that come in out of state to farm here or hunt here. So, and it's actually at a perfect spot. It's dead end road. There's no traffic. I've got all the cover crops growing there. I've got corn, which they love. This loses money very easily. So, I'm frustrated sitting there in the combine saying, what am I going to do? What I got to do about these deer? And then it just kind of hit me. I'm like, I'm farming out of context. I'm trying to be like everybody else farming row crops in this situation where maybe I need to pivot a little bit. I also raise livestock. Sheep is our main enterprise that we make a lot of money with and do very well with. This ground needs to have a fence around it. This ground does not need to have applied amendments to it to raise a crop, which the deer are probably going to annihilate anyway. So I get to thinking, I'm farming out of context. And that's really the route that I'm going. But, it's one of those deals. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. But I don't take crop insurance either, folks. So that's a pain that, I don't think farmers are really going to learn anything until they actually have to go through a little pain. All these bailouts and subsidies and crop insurance that never allow a person to learn from their mistakes or mismanagement. How are we ever going to progress? It's kind of like those hovering parents that, oh, Johnny's never done anything wrong. Well, if little Johnny's never faced the consequences for his ill actions, is he ever going to really grow up to be a respectable and responsible adult? And I think we need to quit harboring some of these bad practices and bad management decisions at the taxpayers' expense at that. Maybe we need to go through some pain a little bit here to understand, ouch, that hurts. Maybe we need to go a different route and look at some different things, which is exactly what I was. I was a polar bear in the desert. I was farming out of context in this operation, right? So I've got to figure out, what can I do now? Is it failure? No, it's a learning opportunity. And that's the way we have to view things. If we look at things as a failure, we get depressed. And folks, the mental stress in agriculture right now is tough. There's a lot of bad attitudes out there, especially as the markets are looking a little unstable. But I can flat out tell you right now, I'm more excited about this year and this crop than I've ever been in my life. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. So I'm walking around as if I've just won $1 million based off what I've got going on right now in our operation. Whereas most people are asking, what's the price of corn or beans? I tell them I don't care. It doesn't matter to me right now. And we'll get into this. So what's the low hanging fruit? Far too often we look at getting stuck on a rut, doing the same thing year after year. How boring is that? We only get so many turns around the sun. Why do I want to do the same thing year after year and wait for somebody else or wait for some technology to come along to change things a little bit? Are we going to lead change, or are we going to be forced to change, folks? And dealing with farmers in England, ask some people that have been forced to change. Dealing with folks in the Chesapeake Bay Area, ask some people that have been forced to change and see how well they accepted it. I'd much rather lead change than be forced to change. And that's where our mindset's at. We don't go out begging and looking for ground. We're in the mindset that if somebody likes what we're doing, they're going to come to us and ask us to manage their land. And that's exactly what's been happening. Is it large scale every year? No. But the way I look at it is, just as I said earlier, if I can just get one ear to kind of understand the change and the power of this change, if I can just get 5 to 10 acres again, that's that much more ground that I'm taking out of a conventional management system that's going to improve the overall water quality and ecosystem functions in the area. And that's my passion, and that's my vision. So I don't want to farm big, but I want to farm better. So things that we were doing, this was last year even. This is something I started to do. I follow a lot of people in a lot of different mindsets as far as how can we maximize production and economics off the landscape. Monocultures aren't it, folks. In my opinion, you have to be so efficient. You have to have such a scale to make monocultures work that's not what I'm going to do. I love spending time with my family. I love spending time out with my livestock, watching them do their job, rather than sitting in a combine seat or tractor seat covering tens of thousands of acres just to hopefully break even. That's not farming, and that's not life to me. To me, life builds life, and I want to encourage as much life on our operation as possible. So we're doing some alley cropping stuff, trying to maximize that solar energy capture on the edge row effect of corn. Usually you see corn on the outsides, the end rows of fields typically have bigger ears because they're able to capture more photosynthetic activity. So that's really what we're trying to do here. So we're doing 30 feet of crop, 30 feet of an annual cover crop, which last summer was terrible. June was very hot, dry, and windy. I seeded a warm season cover crop in there, and you can just barely see it in there. Most of that's mare's tail and foxtail and stuff like that come on. But my cover crop died out twice. We were so hot and dry. Okay, so this is a non-GMO corn hybrid here. Just a little nitrogen put on with planting time. But we also do what's called Jimmy red corn. I started with Bloody Butcher, but I've moved to Jimmy red corn here. Untreated seed, open pollinated corn. The Jimmy red is over here on this side, on the left here. Look at the color of the leaves, the glossiness of the leaves, the plant height. This is a very tall plant. We're using this for cornmeal grits and polenta. We're actually going to start making some bourbon with this as well. So we're starting to expand this. Plus, we can save our own seed and replant that. Whereas look over here on the non-GMO corn, this highly bred, improved, high dollar non-GMO corn struggled all year. Never had good color. Same field, same planting date, same everything. Treated seed, the works. But look at the difference here. You know, and a lot of people say, well, these open pollinated corns, they don't produce like these modern hybrids. And I said, good. I don't want them to, because I'm not selling it by the bushel. I'm selling it by the pound. Folks, something like this, I'm selling for $3 to $5 a pound. If it yields 20 to 30 bushel, I'll let you do the math. I'll let you kind of say, what the heck? If I'm selling it by the pound, the same price I would get this for a bushel, there's a pretty good exponential factor there. So I'll let you do the math yourself on that. But as you can see, this is the Jimmy red corn over here on my daughter's right hand on the left side of the screen. And this is the non-GMO, the modern non-GMO, the treated seed, if you will. Look at the roots. You notice how the roots have more biological activity on them? This, to me, is a soil building process. This is called a rhizosheath. So this is a very active microbiology, which we're able to form and build aggregates, which is the most standard. This is the most disease staple of farm profitability. The bigger and more to depth we build aggregates, the better off we're going to be. But obviously, this modern hybrid here lacked in the aggregation building process. Another thing that stands out to me, you know, after grain fill, we're going around looking at earworm. This modern hybrid here, look at the amount of earworm damages on this. The Jimmy red corn, look at the earworm damage on that, very little. What this equates to is this crop over here, this Jimmy red, was more in sync with the biology. It had access to more dense, more nutrient-dense minerals to help that plant stay healthier and more vibrant and fend off pests. The pests that we battle in agriculture, pests are there to take out the sick plants. So why is it that in all these modern hybrids and things like that we're planting, we've got all these added traits, all these packages, because we know we're growing them in a degraded, sick environment. So they have to have all this extra protection against them, because these insects are nature's garbage recyclers that want to come in and eliminate sick and diseased plants. So this, to me, screams working in synchrony with biology, feeding biology. The biology feeds the plant back, which in turn reduces our use of insecticides. Tassel aphids were very big last year. We were doing a soil health academy in southern Indiana. As I came back home, I hear everybody freaking out about it. I go and look. Yeah, I've got tassel aphids, very bad. But the amount of ants and lady beetles that were crawling up and down our corn plants, consuming those aphids, there's no way I'm going to spray that, folks. Dr. Jonathan Lundgren says that for every one pest that we focus on in agriculture, there's 1,700 other beneficials. If I'm to go in there and spray a foliar application of an insecticide to take care of that tassel aphid, I also take out all my good guys as well. I essentially hit the reset button. For me, it wasn't worth it. You know, the work that I've done to build my insect populations up to help take care of whatever pests want to come in there, when they do, it's not worth it for me. Okay. So that's kind of the management decisions that I go through in the thought process that I'm making when I'm managing these acres. So we're also capitalizing on grazing, right? A lot of people see this as mare's tail, and it's a weed. What a phenomenal forage for our sheep to graze, actually. It's nature's cover crop right now. So the sheep will consume it, and it's a very profitable day. So even if I would have got my cover crop growing, if I would have had very subpar growth, right? If I look at a ton of production, and if I only want to take half, leave half, because I want to leave some of that residue to protect my soil, at 1,000 pounds of available dry matter to consume, if I'm running 50 to 70 pound lambs, this is the amount of forage I need per day. So each acre gives me 8 days worth of grazing. Okay, and some basic math here. If I'm raising 50 lambs, if I'm raising 50 lambs and they gain about 0.4 of a pound per day, which is low, that gives me about 20 pounds per day that I'm gaining times 8 days. That's 160 pounds per acre that I'm growing or that I'm raising on that acre of cover crop there. 160 pounds times the low market average right now, that's $400 an acre, folks. That's just one time through. What if I can do that 2 or 3 times throughout the year? This is how we start to stack profitability into the farming operation. It does take work. And I think, Scott, you mentioned earlier, trying to get young producers to understand or have access to do this. We have to get our head out of the gutter and quit thinking just corn, soybeans, corn, soybeans. You're never going to be profitable. You're never going to move the needle just corn, soybeans. I've never found, or nor will I ever find, a regenerative, healthy, functioning soil with just corn, soybean rotation, even with cover crops in between them. I have set my stake in that. And until we change our mindset of how we see things versus how we do things, we're never going to move the needle. We have to think outside the box. We have to get outside our comfort zone, because doing the status quo is going to get you status quo results all day long. But it does take work. Are you willing to go out there and make things happen? And this is what it is. I mean, it does take work, but there's profit there to be made. Within our Jimmy Red corn, we're also, it's such a tall plant. The ears are about 5.5, 6 foot up in the air. We're also running sheep in between the rows to help reduce our herbicide costs. It's called rattling the corn. I heard it from an old timer one time. Kind of piqued my interest. I was like, there's no sheep in the area. I'm essentially the lone sheep producer in the area. There used to be a lot of sheep in the area, but the guy told me they used to rattle the corn and run the sheep through the cornfields, which they were a lot wider rows back then, 48-inch rows plus. I need to widen my rows a little bit to make this a little more successful. They like to bulldoze around in there a little too much on 30-inch rows. So we'll do some 60-inch row stuff this year to make sure we got enough room, but definitely something we're going to continue to play with. And I see a lot of positives with this because this gives me a break on my perennial pastures. And it's also a way to get animal impact, vegetation management, if you will, within my production fields as well. So I ask producers this all the time when I'm working with them. Is it yield or is it profit? Which one do you want? You can spend a lot of money, you can raise a lot of yield, but what if you can be more profitable with lesser yield? And those are things we have to think about. To me, I want profit. I don't care about, how do I want to say this? We can have butterflies in our stomachs and see unicorns and rainbows running across our regenerative fields, but if we're losing money doing it, folks, that's not going to last very long, right? I need to make money to do this. This is a business, right? So what can I do to be more intense about increasing profit per acre? And it's really watching my overall input cost, right? And how can I salvage that low-hanging fruit, find that extra dollar that I can gather that nobody else is willing to do? And I can tell you right now, and I'm not ashamed to say it, even though a lot of the farmers say they work hard in the area, I'll outwork them all day long because I'm willing to go make it work. I'm not here just raising corn and soybeans, right? There's not just 3 seasons for me. It's not plant, vacation, and harvest vacation. It's work year round. But luckily, I got 4 kids coming up to help me with that. So is it the chase for high yield? As we look at the national corn yield average, have we increased? Yeah, but how fast is it increasing now? And even then, what are we raising? It's essentially a biofuel. Yeah, we're taking a lot of acres out just to raise a biofuel, and a very poor efficient one. And if they want to talk about carbon footprint, I'd love for somebody to do the math on the carbon footprint from manufacturing nitrogen, transporting the seed, growing the seed to get it to make that acre production every year. I wonder what the national what the carbon footprint would be on that. And I've never gotten a firm answer either. So why grow it when it seems like they don't want it? The elevators are always looking for ways to dock you, right? And everybody says there's no premium for regenerative products. I turn the tables and I say this, folks. What if, no, there's no premiums available? And like I said, elevators are always looking for ways to dock you on something, especially wheat. The elevators around here don't seem to want wheat. What if now you get full price for a protein or nutrient content of the grain that meets this standard? You get full price, but if not, you're going to get docked. So essentially, a full price is now a premium, whereas a lot of this corn grown in these conventional, highly tilled, highly synthetic fertilized acres, the national protein content of corn has dropped drastically. It used to be around 7.5 to 8.5%. We're down around 5.5% right now, I think, is the national average. So we're growing more, but it's less nutrient dense. So we talk about all these fortifications, adding more nutrients back into this to even be able to make it worth consuming. Really makes me scratch my head as far as what we are raising. We're raising empty calories and empty food. Why compete with get bigger, get out mentality? As I said, I've got the equipment to farm and raise some row crop. I'm not going to compete with the get big, get out mentality. As I said, I'm more excited this year than I've ever been. some things like this to get thinking differently. I've got a producer up around the Monmouth area doing some stuff here, wide row corn. He dropped 32,000 in 60-inch rows. He dropped 29,000 in 60-inch rows, and he dropped 27,000 in 60-inch rows. But look at the increase in yield. I told him, I said, man, you should have kept pushing the population lower and see how low we could have went here. But yield increased as he dropped population. He interseeded some cover crop. This is changing the way you see things on your operation here. This is very, very productive soil. But he's looking at it from a way to capture some extra dollars from grazing his cattle across this. And what a perfect diet to have some of this dry matter along with some fresh green vegetation to grow for them cattle to consume across that fall. There's some very interesting things. I kind of stole my idea from this stock cropper mindset. To me, this just was not practical. Moving just a couple head of sheep in here and a couple head of hogs along with chickens. I'd much rather have a larger animal impact if I'm going to go and make the moves. I want it to be more beneficial to me. But things like this. This is a gentleman up in Iowa that's doing some pretty interesting things. And, I'm not going to say there's any system that's perfect or wrong. It's a matter of what works for you individually. There's a producer out in Indiana, Jason Mock, who's doing some really neat things about raising two crops on the same acre at the same time, doing this relaying crop, if you will. So he's got soybeans planted in here with his wheat. He'll come in here with a standard header with some plates that push the beans down so he can harvest the wheat off. And then the soybeans will explode up from there after that. So doing some very interesting things, improving the net profitability of the acre by doing that. And there's no wrong way. But to me, it's diversity. Diversity is my favorite of all the 634. We've got the diversity in our of the 6 principles. We've got diversity in the 3 rules, and we've got ecosystem diversity in the 4 ecosystem processes. Diversity is what's critical. If we lived in a town where there was all plumbers, right? We'd have a hard time finding a carpenter. So it takes the community, it takes the whole to make the whole system work, and that's what it's about. And that's what I said. Diversity is very critical, and this was historically our operation here. A mix of non-GMO corn, Roundup corn, traded soybeans, and wheat occasionally, and livestock only on the pastures. That's the way we used to manage things. But boy, once I started to really think outside the box and find opportunities here, we're now raising non-GMO corn, traded corn, public soybeans, einkorn wheat, Jimmy red corn, barley, rye. We've also got some Reed's yellow dent that we're going to be raising. We've got roast livestock on our row crop ground as much as possible, even before the crop is removed. We've got chickens, laying hens, meat birds. We've had cattle, but we sold out of cattle a few years ago just because of time constraints and the market was too good. But you want to talk about food. We've got oats as well planted. We did not do barley. I substituted oats for barley. But these things right here, this Jimmy red corn, einkorn wheat, the oats, those are all things that we're going to be looking at moving to the consumer, right? And there's a market there. There's a lot of our market for the einkorn wheat. So we've got what's called black einkorn wheat. So we're excited about getting that growing as well. And it doesn't have to be large acres, folks. People think that you have to have 40, 50 acres of this stuff. Start small, learn your market share and grow into your market versus try to force that market to come to you. I've heard of people even raising bee balm, Monarda fistulosa, a lot of the berry markets now, like I say, the einkorn wheat. These are actually like choke cherries, if you will. Aronia berries essentially is what they are. So finding ways to develop markets, and you have to figure out what your market is. And as producers, we're good at producing, but we absolutely suck at marketing for ourselves and selling ourselves and what we can raise. So that's really what it comes down to. I used to work in the ag retail system, as I said, and I heard one of my main agronomists told me, he says, we're going to grow more with more. Folks, really what that's leading us to, you guys are dealing with it on the water quality side. There's about 1 billion pounds of conventional pesticides sprayed every year, according to the USGS. What's our water quality like? Are we having to put in more water treatment plants? There's a little town out in Kansas that we did a lot of work with out for a General Mills project called Pretty Prairie. About 600 people in that town had to put in a very expensive multi-million-dollar water treatment plant, and there's nothing else around there, folks. It is simply wheat and corn around that town. There's no hog confinements. There's no city. Their water is so bad that the citizens, and they did not qualify for a government grant to get that water treatment plant put in, so the citizens had to foot the bill to get that water treatment plant put in there. To me, that is absolutely frustrating. Here in Illinois, as I was working in ag retail, the 4R stewardship was very, we thought it was going to be the savior, right? It was going to be the big thing that we're going to do to really drive the nutrient loads down. How are we looking by our 25 interim objective of a 15% decrease in nitrates and a 25% decrease in phosphorus? How are we doing? Well, we're on the opposite end. On nitrates, we actually got a 4% increase, and on phosphorus, we got a 35% increase of runoff and loss. Our long-term objective of 45% reduction in this is not going to happen with the standard approach that we've got. It's not a simple do this and you're going to reduce things. I'm not saying cover crops alone are the savior. I'm not saying no-till alone is a savior. I'm not saying for our stewardship is a savior. It's everything together. And I think until we can get our head around that and think that once we silo affect things and start to pick and choose, we miss everything. We have to take everything as collective and as a whole. And it's going to take a systems approach of all these things to drive these numbers down, because the Gulf of Mexico is not going to stand it. We as consumers and tax-paying citizens are not going to stand for it either. And I'll put my foot down on this. I cringe when I hear the reports on this, when they actually have improvement on these runoff numbers going towards their goal. You know, they cheers and pop champagne bottles and say, oh, we're on the right track. But yet when we have a wet spring, they blame it on the weather. Folks, weather's going to happen no matter what. But what can we do to weatherproof our operation as much as possible to eliminate the negative effects from that? Farm debt continues to rise and delinquencies remain stagnant, but the debt just continues, folks. People are, you know, this year I've really pulled back on my real crop acres just because of the amount of money it's costing right now. A single pass of a herbicide right now is costing what it used to cost for 2 passes of application. You know, but until producers understand they got to change the way they see things versus the way they do things, I don't know what else I can tell them. You know, once we can get them to understand how the soil functions, their mind starts to turn, and then they can start to understand how we can start to reduce these costs. Farmers are aging, but young farmers numbers are growing. And this is what I'm positive about, folks. I firmly believe the younger generation has the passion and they want to see things change for the better. I see a lot of times the guys 50 to 70 years old, they've rode that horse for a long time. They're not going to change it, but the ones that do change, they enjoy it. You know, they regret farming the way they've been farming for years. But I see a lot of passion and I see a lot of positivity in the younger generation coming on here, seeing how important the nature cycle is, you know, improving ecosystem function, seeing more birds, seeing more wildlife come around, letting things come back into balance is what we've got to get back to. I want to see more finch rows planted than I want to see corn rows planted. So that's where I want to see things go. You know, we would say all this and we talk about the negatives, but I still look at this, I say, good. You know, you can focus on the negative all you want. The thing about it is we're here, we've got air in our lungs, we've got an opportunity to take this thing and move it forward, right? We're not dead yet. Let's keep moving. Let's keep encouraging people to see what production ag can be like and what it can be, how it can be done for the benefit of everybody. It's all about mindset. I've really focused hard on this the last few years. Folks, I want to enjoy what I'm doing. If I hang around 5 happy people, you'll be the 6. My wife, as smart aleck as she is, she says, I wish you'd hang around 5 good-looking people then. So that's the way we got to be, though. You know, hang around the happy people. It's gonna transfer to you. But just as we use disruption as a tool in our management systems to improve soil health and function, we need to do the same for ourselves. There's a part of our brain that actually responds well to positive stress. I'm not saying go out there and turn all your acres into regenerative. Let's start within your comfort level, right? Work with somebody that understands your context and your goals and understands your risk factors, that you can see what potential success could be. And even if there is that learning opportunity or failure, what's your bailout plan? What's your way to salvage any economic dollar from that? And that's what understanding ag, or in my opinion, we're the best at, because we help people understand it's not just do this and get this. It's okay, what if something does happen? Here's the other many other options we've got to salvage the dollar from that investment. So that won't work here. Regenerative ag is fad, cover crops are at yield. You know, we've heard them all. I'm tired of the excuses. You know, there is no excuse. And simply what it comes down to is you got to lead change, as I said earlier, versus being forced to and waiting for policy. I get so tired of hearing policy change. And I was actually asked to be a part of Illinois Farm Bureau's regenerative ag policy resolution group here just a few months ago, and I was able to sit in on that. I'm very happy to hear some of the terms and things that we're getting put in place. But to me, it shouldn't take policy. It shouldn't take incentives. It should take simply understanding that there's some positives that we can have happen by changing and implementing these regenerative ag practices. You shouldn't have to be incentivized to do everything. You should want to do it, but you should also understand that there's profitability in it if you can find out where it's at. But ultimately, you know your farm the best. You know, that's what I tell producers. You know, I'm not here to tell you how to farm. I can give you some examples, but ultimately, you know your farm the best. You can ask 5 farmers how to do things, and you're going to get 10 different answers on how to do things. And that's fine. I believe in the freedom to farm, but I think it's gotten too far to where the freedom to farm is giving people a pretty long leash, and a lot of poor practices are being implemented. And we've got to really turn things around, in my opinion. So where do you start? Really, it depends. You got to start with market research. Why grow something if you know there's no market for it? Do you start in your better ground or worse ground along the highway or the back 40? Me, I love starting right on the highway. I want people to say, what the heck is he doing? I love it. I'd much rather they be picking on me because they're leaving somebody else alone. Start small, right? Practice what you preach. I hear too often people, I'm regenerative. Okay. What are you doing with your food dollar? Well, I'm just buying everything at Walmart, So are you buying locally from a neighbor who's doing things the way that align with your values and your views? We constantly try to find sources that raise a product that we might not be able to raise, or we're not interested in raising, but we support somebody else that's doing it the way that we see fit. So reward those people, use your food dollar and support those people that are doing things that align with your values. So as I said, started this whole thing off, so this all sounds, good and well. It's not a smear session. It's not a hype session, but you have to understand that you have to be aggressive, but not too aggressive. You got to be cautious, but not sitting on your butt stagnant cautious, right? And that's why I go with this. You got to make every day a success. Every season has to count. If you would ask me a couple of years ago if I'd had the opportunity to be here and continue to do what I'm doing, I would have called you silly. But the good Lord blessed me with a couple awesome scenarios. I look at everything as a positive. Make every day count. And I'm more fierce than ever right now, and especially as I alluded to Scott, but I'm not going to let the whole group know. But during my time in Agrita, I was exposed to some situations that have also caused me some personal health issues that I'm dealing with right now. So I don't take this very lightly. Production ag should be enjoyable. It should be fun. It should be long living. I want this to be a scenario that I'm leaving for the next thousands of years to be able to benefit from. And that's my focus in production ag. So with that, I'll take time for some questions. I apologize if I buzzed through it, but I'd much rather have open questions and conversation after the fact. So I appreciate you folks and your time and your interest. And like I said, I'm here for any questions. So thank you.